Welcome to the lecture for crisis intervention. This time I'll be talking about partner violence and crises related to partner violence. So we'll start off by clarifying and defining some terms that are often used interchangeably but have subtly different meanings, especially in the context of your reading. Battering is a pattern of physical violence and also often associated with a sense of entrapment. Right? So it's not just one act of violence. It's a pattern of violence. And also, beyond that, it's violence that is difficult to escape because of other contextual variables that make the person who's being battered feel like they have few options for getting out of that situation. Okay. Abuse is a more general term. It encompasses both physical and emotional violence or assault. So verbal abuse included here as well. And it assumes an unequal power relationship, right? To be an abuser, you must have some power over the victim, and that can be could be just physical power, physically strong. It could be economical power, or the other person is dependent upon you economically. Could be a more subtle power dynamic that's not easily defined in terms of wealth or physical strength, but such that one person says what to do and the other person feels compelled, obliged to comply. Right? So it's a violence that's reactionary and not committed by someone in a position of power would not then be considered abuse. Right? So abuse can only be done by someone who is has kind of the upper hand. And abuse is also characterized by a violation of trust. There's an assumption in some relationship that the person in power, right, because that's part of it too, will not harm and maybe even is responsible for protecting the person who they're in a relationship with. Right? So it's not a relationship where you expect to be having conflict, and this person, well, yeah, they're supposed to be harmful to me, and I don't trust them to treat me well, because why would they? They're my enemy. That's not abuse. That's war, right? This is somebody who's not your enemy, somebody who's you're supposed to have a trusting relationship with, violates that trust and abuses their power when engaging in physical and emotional abuse. Okay. Then assaultive behavior is more of a specific term, right? So this is any harmful acts or threats against a person or their significant others, pets, or property. So it can be a lot of different things, but it's just it's just the behavior, right? Whereas abuse and battering are broader terms. So assaultive behavior is often a feature of battering and abuse, but someone who engages in assaultive behavior may not be a batterer or an abuser, right? If it's not part of a larger pattern, or if they're not in a position of power over the other person, then assaultive behavior may not always occur in the context of abuse or battering. Somebody loses their temper and pushes their partner one time, and if it's the husband or the wife doing the pushing, either way, that's assaultive behavior, and that might be occurring in the context of abuse or battering, but not necessarily. Okay, in abusive and battering relationships, both parties could engage in assaultive behavior theoretically. And then domestic violence is another broad term that subsumes any act of assault that's committed by a social partner or a relative. So you don't have to be married. People think, it's not domestic violence unless they're married. No, it could be a romantic partner, could be a friend, could be a relative that's not a romantic interest. So domestic violence is assaultive behavior in a domestic context, right? And then battering is this pattern of violence and entrapment that often occurs with domestic violence being the part of the pattern. And then abuse is the broadest term that encompasses all of these. Okay. One of the questions that people often have is, why does abuse happen? And the simple answer is, there is no simple answer. It's multiple reasons, and it's potentially different reasons for different couples, different pairings of individuals. Abuse might occur for one set of reasons with this couple and another set of reasons for this couple. And then within a particular pairing, it's usually not just one reason. So it's multiple reasons within a couple, and then those multiple reasons can differ across couples. But there are some theories trying to explain, trying to understand why this happens, and it's important to be familiar with those, and not that, okay, well, I have to know these because I have to figure out the reason, but being familiar with the theories, if it's a good theory, helps you understand behavior, contextualize behavior, and sometimes can help you predict behavior, which is often helpful in clinical work. One of the big ones is attachment theory, right? Which attachment theory talks about how early experiences with caregivers are hugely important, right? And they shape our view of ourselves, of relationships, and the world around us, right? And they also contribute to relational behavior patterns, also called attachment behaviors, right? And these attachment behaviors are designed to preserve relational attachments, right? And we develop a comfort level with intimacy, and also comfort with being separated from those we're in relationships with, all based on these early experiences. And we develop, like I said, these attachment behaviors, which are strategies for maintaining the relationship. And what strategies we develop are related to and based on our comfort levels. And our comfort levels are based on how successful our strategies are. So it all kind of interplays in terms of how securely attached you are, how comfortable you are in being that the person you're in a relationship with isn't going to leave you. And then what you do to ensure that is related to your sense of comfort, and vice versa. Right? So early relationship experiences, which are with your primary caregivers, establish the base for your attachment style. Right? And think about this kind of internal working model of how you see the world, how you see relationships, and what you're going to do. But then all relationship experiences from that point forward will occur in the context of that original attachment style, but these future relationships or following relationships can also influence or change a person's attachment style. So you can become more or less secure in your attachment style depending on what relationship experiences you have, which are dependent on multiple factors, including what the person you're in a relationship with, what their attachment style is, right? How secure they are, and what they do to prevent the end of an attachment. Okay. So that's a quick and dirty overview of attachment theory. So applying it to abusers, they tend to have histories of bad parenting, right? So inconsistent parenting, abusive parenting, which we know contributes to an insecure attachment style early on. And they also tend to have multiple negative relationship events in their relationship history, right? So it seems likely that they would have insecure attachment styles, and that you could try to account for the abusive behavior by saying that it's a desperate attempt to avoid abandonment. It's an attachment behavior that they're insecure about being alone, and they haven't developed healthy ways of maintaining a relationship, and so their high level of anxiety and fear lead to extreme behaviors, including abuse. And then you can also attempt to apply attachment theory to understanding why some victims may stay in an abusive relationship. Right? It's again possible that they might also have insecure attachment styles. Right? So, I think part of attachment style is a view of yourself. So if there's kind of this core belief that you're not worthy of better treatment and that no one else could love or care for you, that core belief could certainly have its roots in early attachment experiences and in your attachment style. And so, again, a fear of being abandoned or being alone could lead to behaviors that contribute to staying in an abusive relationship, potentially. There's also some abusers, and this in attachment theory might be used to kind of try to explain behavior across multiple different types of abuse situations. In terms of psychopathy and sociopathy, it seems to be a small percentage of abusers, a small proportion of cases where an abuser who seems to suffer from really a deviant personality that might be referred to as psychopathy or sociopathy. You may hear terms like antisocial personality disorder. Right? And these individuals seem to be a little different than others, and they use terroristic techniques, like brainwashing, right, to establish a coercive form of control over their victims. So this is really where there's something beyond just some relational problems and maybe immaturity on the part of the abuser. These people, something is really wrong with them, and they seem to not just use abuse to control, but they enjoy the control and thrive on it. And the outcomes tend to be poor for victims in these situations where the abuser is a psychopath, not surprisingly. Cultural attitudes obviously play a huge role, a variety of them, but if we look at just two areas of cultural attitudes that seem to be important. One, beliefs in male dominance and female submissiveness as appropriate gender roles, that men are supposed to be powerful and in control, and they're responsible for directing, being the head of the family, right? And that women are to demur to their male counterparts, right? Because it's the natural order of things. And I'm not going to get into debate about whether or not that's right or wrong, but there's clear evidence that people who have identified more strongly with those attitudes are at greater risk for being in abusive relationships. Okay. Another one that you may not think about as much is our culture, at least in Western culture, and other cultures as well too, to some degree, belief in violence as a means to peace. Right, so this is basically thinking that the abuse is a downward extension of larger societal belief, to smaller units of society. So if we believe that, to achieve peace in the world, we have an army and a military force to go out and engage in violent acts to establish peace, and that the only way to establish peace is to exert control. So might makes right, and the more powerful people have a responsibility to use their power to make sure life runs smoothly and people do as they should. Right? So if you say, okay, that's in our kind of ethos and our way of thinking, it's not a big stretch to say, okay, if we extend it down to the family unit, whoever has the most power, physically, economically, has a responsibility to use that power to maintain peace and make sure people should do as they should, right? And the person in power defines what the other person should do. Okay. Another theory, learned helplessness, which is adopted from Seligman's work, which hopefully you're familiar with, animal research looking at dogs that couldn't avoid shock, and used to develop a model of depression, really. But when applied to abuse situations, it's about this idea that if you're not able to predict behavioral contingencies, such that no matter what you do, bad things happen. So it's not like if the victim always has meals ready at certain times and irons the clothes and does these things, everything will be fine. The idea that even when they do everything that they think that they're supposed to do, that will lead to the avoidance of abuse can still happen, right? Which leads to a sense of helplessness. And it's not that they're truly helpless, but it makes you feel helpless in terms of an inability to predict what's going to happen. So bad things are going to happen no matter what. And if that happens, that has some profound effects on how you feel and also on what attempts you make to exert your autonomy. Okay. And then I think the theory that may help tie all this together would be nested ecological theory, which looks at 4 levels of factors. So intrapersonal factors, which is all the stuff we just talked about, but also other things in terms of abuse histories, both for victims and abusers. Having been abused as children increases the risk of being an abuser and being a victim of abuse as an adult. Witnessing abuse, also for both parties. And then other different things that are different for abusers and victims. But there's certain things that about a certain individual that might put them at risk, either for being an abuser or being a victim. But then there are also family system variables. So things like dysfunctional communication patterns, inequality of roles in the family. Then we think even more broadly in terms of the local community, in terms of whatever cultural group they identify with, what their cultural beliefs are relative to relationships and gender and power. And then the last one, the broadest, would be broad societal factors. So, mass media messages about gender, about abuse, institutionalized inequalities, and a lack of consequences for people who commit domestic violence. Right, the tendency of society to send the message indirectly that it's okay because people who do it don't get in serious trouble, right? Unless they really hurt them. If they kill somebody, okay, now put them in jail. But until then, the punishments are not as severe as if they engage in some of those same acts with a stranger, right? So it's as if this domestic relationship, if it's romantic or familial or otherwise, makes it okay to engage in greater acts of violence. Okay. So the second question people have beyond why does abuse happen is, well, why don't the victims just leave? Who wants to stay around and get hit? And again, multiple reasons, and the sets of reasons differ across individuals. We can break it down into kind of two groups of things. One would be beliefs on the part of the victim, and beliefs in terms of religious and cultural attitudes about marriage or about family, that it's wrong to leave, that it's sinful, or possibly that it's not really a problem, though this is how families are supposed to be. Yeah, if I get out of line, they're supposed to get upset and hit me, and that's a way to remind me of how I'm supposed to be. If that's all you've ever seen, it might be hard to think that there's anything different, right? Or the idea that this is my cross to bear, right? I've got to suffer in life to achieve some greater spiritual reward. So there's a variety of sets of religious cultural beliefs that might play a role. Also, beliefs about the potential impact on the children. If there are children involved, what would be the financial impact of leaving, or the emotional impact? Am I going to deprive them of their father, or more rarely, their mother? And also, sometimes it surprises people, but fear about the impact, or beliefs about the impact on the batterer. What might he do to himself? And oftentimes the batterer will say, if you ever left me, I would kill myself. Right? And that's a heavy load to bear, to kind of take that risk. Well, I feel I need to leave, but I also don't want to feel like I would be killing this person, which is a cognitive distortion, but one that makes sense in that context. So worry about what they would do to themselves. Also, beliefs that maybe the batterer might change, and they probably will promise to change. Belief that they still care for and love me, and they might. That's the really confusing part. And then also fear of reprisal. Right, so there's kind of a known violence, and sometimes the known violence is more comfortable than the potential for this unknown violence. Well, if I left, he said he would kill me and the kids, and that's scarier than, while I'm here, he hasn't killed me yet. I don't think he'll kill me, but if I leave, I'm pretty sure he will. So fear of things getting worse, either on the part of the batterer or other people in the family or cultural community. There might be negative repercussions for breaking up the family unit. Right? So there's all these different beliefs that could be at play, but then there are also some practical constraints. Isolation or lack of resources, being geographically and relationally isolated, where there's nobody to talk to about it. And this is something that abusers often make their victims financially dependent on them, and often also geographically isolate them to discourage abandonment. Because again, this is the idea that they don't want to be left, and they know that the person they're hitting would probably want to leave. They're not completely stupid, not completely. So they make it difficult for that person to leave by isolating them and limiting the resources that they have access to. So it may not be practical for the person to leave. If I leave, what next? Am I just homeless? I have no money, no car, nowhere to live. My kids have nothing to eat. Sounds like some practical reasons to not leave. Injury. They might, depending on the level of violence, they might be too hurt, too banged up to leave. There's also potential that they've had previous unsuccessful attempts where they've either tried to leave or talked about leaving, and then there really was a reprisal, a retaliation that scared them enough to say, this person really will kill me, and there's no way I can get out of this alive. All I can do is bear it. Right? Or perhaps even more unfortunately, they may have attempted to leave, and they got a negative reaction from the people who were supposed to help. Right? So they maybe go to family or friends or the church, and they're told, "What are you doing? You're being ridiculous. You don't break up this family. You go back to where you were." And so they're punished for trying to leave. And then there's also potential, even within government agencies, of misunderstandings. If a woman who's been in an abusive relationship for a long time, if she has kids and she tries to leave and asks for help, if there's a government agency involved with the kids, depending on whether or not they believe she's really going to leave, they may take her kids away the next time she makes contact to let them. If they don't know where she is, kind of off the grid, she makes contact and they say, "Okay, we know where you are. We know these kids are in danger. We're taking your kids away." That's another kind of thing that could have happened, or it could also be back up into the belief about what might happen if they were to seek help. Okay, so a variety of reasons, and they're different for different individuals. But then there are other things that get in the way of intervention beyond these other beliefs and practical considerations, preventing them from asking for help. There are other myths, cultural false beliefs that get in the way of intervention, either because, again, they deter people from seeking help, or because they deter people on the outside from getting involved. Right? No, I'm not going to do anything, because there's these kind of beliefs that are part of our cultural fabric. One, and this is kind of related to, should sound similar to some of the rape myths we've talked about, that the victim provoked the abuse, or even more disturbing, that the victim enjoyed it, that there's some sort of masochist, right? They must be. And again, this probably goes back to our the just world phenomenon, that we want to believe that the world is just and makes sense. Well, if something bad's happening to somebody and they're not leaving, well, then it must not be too bad, or they must like it, or they must know they deserved it, right? Because we have this need to believe that the world is a just place and everything happens for a reason. But as counselors training, hopefully you've realized that that's just not true. Another big one is that it's a private matter, right? This is a family deal. They should work it out. Again, where this is where the same acts of violence or terrorism, if committed between people who were strangers or acquaintances, would arouse immediate reaction by others in the community, including law enforcement. But when it's in this family context, for some reason, we're like, okay, we've got to respect their privacy. They have a right to deal with it as they want to. Another one is that it's a substance abuse problem. It's not really a partner abuse problem. It only happens whenever he drinks. And one thing that we know from the research is that substance abuse is a problem in terms of domestic violence, but it's not so much that the violence occurs because they drink. They drink in order to engage in the violence. So they have this kind of violent tendency, and then for some abusers, there's enough inhibition there where they know it's wrong, so that they can't do it. But they know, well, if I get drunk, you decrease your inhibitions, and then I'll be able to do it, and I'll feel better letting out all my rage and anger. Right? So substance abuse is a problem, but whenever there's partner abuse, it's not just a substance abuse problem. Right? They're abusing substances usually so that they can engage in their violent control of another individual. Another myth is that women are the property of their husbands, right? Because if a woman's a property, then the husband has the right to do what he wants with his property. And this goes back to that kind of male dominance, female submissiveness, extending that to a man has greater personhood than a woman. And this, in the past, has been institutionalized in our laws. We talk about unequal or different rights. the right to vote, not the right to vote. You don't have a right to vote because you're not as much a person, right? And we've had some changes in our culture related to that, but it's still not, though that myth is still there, and still fairly pervasive, if more subtle than in the past. Another one, what only happens to other people, what only happens to poor people or sick people or mentally retarded people. And it certainly doesn't happen to older couples. And we know that none of that's true, that it happens all walks of life, and even in older adults. And in older adults, it can be especially dangerous because they're physically more fragile. You know, a push and a shove with a young couple bruises, and it's not good, it's bad. Push and shove with an older couple, you have a broken hip, that could lead to death, right? Because it's harder to recover as you get older. Talking about, getting up past 75, so the old, to use a gerontological term. So it happens in all walks of life. And the last myth I want to touch on is that, well, if they're in love, it's not abuse, they're just passionate. No. Abuse is abuse, and abuse ironically can exist in the context of love. You say, well, if it's really abuse, then they must not be in love. But if I think they're in love, then it can't be abuse. No, both can happen, right? And it in many ways it makes sense that would happen because what we know about the abuse histories of abusers and victims, that they probably learned early on that you do hurt the ones you love, and that's part of loving, which is a really messed up schema, but one that seems to be present in these situations. So love and abuse aren't, even though you may think theoretically they shouldn't coexist, and I would agree with you, they certainly can. Right? Somebody can abuse someone and still have loving feelings for them. Okay, so what do we do? Starting off with assessment. The first thing, believe them when somebody comes forward, calls the call line, comes to your office, and they say that they're a victim of domestic violence, partner violence. Believe them and intervene. Rarely do people make this stuff up, right? Usually it's the other way around, that they don't report it, and they don't report it until there's been multiple violent incidents, right? So you don't need to waste time by trying to assess the verity of their claim, because it would be really rare for somebody to be kind of malingering with something like this. Obviously, it's important. One of our main goals is to ensure safety, so we have to do some assessment regarding safety. So when we do this, you want to make sure and do it calmly and assertively. So asking if the person is there with them, and being able to ask, do you think that they are going to kill you? Be able to ask that without freaking them out by talking about them. But you have to talk about it. But you have to do it in a way that's very calm. And do you think that they left the house and they went away? When they come back, are you concerned that they're going to harm you? That might hit me. Are you concerned that they're going to kill you? So ask in a very calm, straightforward, assertive way. And you have to assess whether or not the risk is imminent, right? Because, in terms of legal requirements for what we have to do and what we can do in terms of breaking confidentiality ethically differs for adults and children. And for children, if there's abuse going on, and abuse could happen again, it's required disclosure, right? We make a report. For adults, it's not. We only trigger kind of duty to report stuff, Tarasoff type things, if there is imminent risk when adults are involved. So you need to assess what's the likelihood and what's the timeline of potential danger, which is not an easy thing to do. But then the last thing is you also have to ask about children, because, again, our reporting requirements are different for kids. And, again, if a spouse is being abused and the kids are seeing it, that's causing damage to them. And we know that. if you know that they have seen the abuse, that's a required report. If they don't, if they say, oh no, the kids see that I'm banged up, but I just tell them I fall down, they've never seen it, he's never touched them, now it doesn't trigger that required reporting. Right? Potentially. And again, this is where you have to use your intuition and your experience for, okay, what's the likelihood that this person could become violent with the children? If it's like, well, yeah, they might become violent with the kids. They've been violent with other kids in the past. Maybe they had other kids and they hit them and they got taken away. Okay, that's a red flag. I'm going to report this. Even though he hasn't hit these kids yet, history of hitting other kids, hitting the current spouse, that's enough for me to say this is a required report. So need to assess if there are children involved and what kind of danger they might be in. One thing to be cautious about is misinterpretation of behaviors. Beware of misinterpreting behaviors that are really temporary reactions to the abuse. So they're probably, when they're calling in, it's not going to be the first time. They're probably going to be really distraught, have a lot of affective intensity potentially, or they could be more on the usually it could be more on just the depressed, no affect side of things, probably limited mobility. But you don't want to interpret those as signs of permanent individual pathology. Okay, this person is clearly suffering from some severe mood disorder, maybe a psychotic disorder. They're not making any sense. There might be that stuff going on, but you can't tell that right now because there's this kind of imminent crisis that makes people seem crazy, right? Because they've been beaten up and they're terrified enough to call you, to talk to you. So you have to understand those behaviors in the context of when they're coming in. Another thing about assessment is that the fact that ambivalence about leaving is the rule rather than the exception. So you want to assess their level of ambivalence. So you ask about both sides. You ask about reasons for leaving. You ask about reasons for staying, and you try to gauge a sense of where they are at with their ambivalence, because that's going to give you some ideas of where to intervene. And the last thing for assessment I want to touch on is assessing their needs and resources, right? Because we have to identify the barriers to taking action. If they decided they wanted to leave, needed to leave, do they have a place to live? Do they have transportation? Are their kids involved, and who can they take care of them too? Do they have sufficient money, for now? So you want to ask about those things as well. Then we get to intervention, and a couple things. Listening, always important, but especially important here to be non-judgmental, right? Because shame is a common emotion in individuals. Because again, whenever they present for help, it's usually not after the first time. So there's often a sense of shame that they haven't done something before, and even shame that they're not sure about what they're doing right now. Right? So you want to be very non-judgmental, but also affirming them that what you're doing right now is good, is right, yes, good for you. Right? So along with that, lots of supporting. Right? So giving them plenty of space and time to vent, and they may need a few minutes, they may need a longer time, but you give them the time they need, because there's probably a lot of intense emotions that they haven't been able to share anywhere else that they're going to need to share with you. And you give them the space and time to do that, and don't rush them into, okay, I know you have all these things you want to talk about, but we have to have a plan. You'll get to the plan. Give them the space and time they need to vent. Then, when it comes to facilitating change, this is difficult, but you really have to meet them where they're at. Right? We talk about that ambivalence. If they're thinking about leaving but not committed yet, you can't jump to, okay, well, you're gonna go to this shelter, you're gonna do this, this, and this, and this. Are you ready? And they're like, no. You have to meet them where they're at. And if you think about, Prochaska and Norcross's stage of change model might help you with this in terms of, are they in the contemplative stage, the pre-contemplative stage? So, and this is why I talked about how it's so important about assessing their ambivalence. Where are they at in their thinking about taking some action about leaving? And it may be that they are where they're not going to leave, but they still need your help, right? And I'll get to that in just a minute. But when you're trying to facilitate things, you want to reinforce several things. You want to reinforce their effort to make contact. I'm so proud of you for calling, for coming in. That takes a lot of courage. I know it's not easy, because it's not easy. It's scary. And if it was easy, they would have done it the first time. Right. You want to reinforce their rational thoughts and rational decision making. So you decided, which is also getting the next part, reinforcing personal power. You decided to call, and you recognize that the situation is not good, and not the way relationships are supposed to be, not the way you want the relationship to be, right? And reinforcing their sense of personal power that. And it's not you come to me and I'm going to be the new person to be in power over you, because they've been in that relationship where they've been dependent on somebody. So we don't want to create a new dependency. So we want to reinforce the sense that they have the ability to make decisions. We're going to be here to help them and provide resources and anything they need, and listen and be supportive. But they have the choice of what to do if they're going to do anything. Right. Getting back to meeting them where they're at, using open-ended questions to provoke reflection on the costs and benefits of staying and leaving. So this is kind of using some motivational interviewing type techniques. Tell me what kind of things you are thinking about whenever he's hitting you. Okay. Whenever it stops and he goes away, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Right. So getting them to think about those things. Whenever he comes back later and apologizes and says it'll never happen again, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? And again, not telling them what to think, what to feel, but getting them to talk about it. And if you can do that and stay out of their way, usually they'll realize, oh God, I've never really said this out loud and thought about it. It really is bad. This isn't good. This isn't okay. Right? You might think, well, how could they not know that? Of course it's bad. But when you're caught up in that storm of abuse, it can be hard to see things clearly. So this is your opportunity to help them see some things. Again, not by telling them, but by asking them questions to draw it out of themselves. Now, when it gets down to the action plan, might be getting out of the situation, right? So it might involve shelter, contact with relatives, may involve police intervention if the person is still there, if they're actively about to cause harm, and harm is imminent. So lots of different things that you might have to consider in terms of getting them, keeping them safe, and getting them out of that relationship, and lots of details related to that. But the action plan might also be dealing with the emotional turmoil of the here and now. So no, I'm not ready to leave, but I need somebody to talk to because I can't do anything right now. I can't. My kids are crying, and I can't take care of them. I think I'm losing it. So they're not ready to leave, but they need your help anyway. And you have to be like, okay, I will help you with that. Like, even though they need to get out, if they're not ready, they're not ready. And you don't say, okay, well, if you're not going to leave, I'm out here. Hang up the phone, get out of my office, whatever. No, you meet them where they're at, and you do what you need to do for them. So you use your crisis intervention techniques to help them deal with emotional turmoil that's fallout, right, from the abuse. But you also want to arrange for another contact, because you know that the problem isn't solved just by addressing that fallout. That's going to come back, and you want to plant that seed that, okay, I'm going to help you get through this right now. You may feel this way again if he does this again. I know he's promised never to do it again. Some men that promise that, many men that promise that, do it again. I want you to call me back in a week. I'm going to call you back in a week, whatever. You make some arrangements for future contact if the current plan doesn't involve getting them out. Okay. A little bit about another population that we don't think about as much. And everything I've talked about so far applies to the LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, queer population in terms of partner violence and intervention and assessment. But then there are some other issues that are maybe unique to this population related to partner violence. One is the potential for the abuser, the batterer, to use homophobic control. All right, so they might threaten to out their partner if their partner's not out yet, or what's referred to double outing, divulge their HIV status if they are HIV positive. So there are kind of some other weapons that abusers can use in this population that aren't as effective in the heterosexual population. Another issue is that sometimes the victim status is less clear to outsiders. So when the police show up, if it's 2 men or 2 women, and both are claiming that the other one started it or is the abuser, harder for the police to figure things out. Whenever it's a heterosexual couple, the police will assume that it's the man, unless there's a disproportionate amount of evidence that it is the woman who's the abuser. And they do that because that's statistically what happens. And there are women who are abusers and who are batterers. But that's the exception to the rule. So to keep the most people safe, whether it's fair or not, to keep most people safe, you assume that the male is the batterer. And it's this heuristic that makes it easier to intervene. Right? With same-sex partners, you don't have that heuristic. You don't have that easy rule of thumb. And so that can delay intervention, can confuse intervention, and lead to potentially even secondary traumatization for the victim whenever people that are supposed to come and help don't help because they don't know who to help. Right? Related to that, access to shelters, especially very few shelters for gay men, and then for lesbian women, they may not be comfortable going to a shelter with other women. If the person that abused them was a woman, you may not be around other women. And sometimes other women at a shelter aren't comfortable having lesbian women come in there if they're are homophobic. Which so the last point, homophobia and heterosexism among providers, caregivers, people who are supposed to respond to partner violence. With homophobia obviously being fear and other negative feelings related to same-sex relationships and attendant discrimination, which is certainly less prominent now. I don't know that it's any less common. Maybe somewhat, but certainly still widespread in the States, and provides a barrier to accessing services for a lot of same-sex couples. And then heterosexism is the other. Heterosexism is stereotype beliefs and assumptions related to the fact that heterosexual relationships are how relationships are, and that everybody is that way. Right? So seeing the world only from the viewpoint of male-female relationships, even if there aren't kind of negative feelings towards same-sex couples, heterosexism involves a lack of understanding of the unique relational properties associated with same-sex relationships, because you assume everything that's true for opposite-sex relationships is true for same-sex relationships, which there's certainly plenty of overlap where things are true, but there's some things that are just different, and they don't work the same way. Okay, so summing up, in terms of intervention for partner violence, like everything, it's important to be knowledgeable of the resources available in your community, right? Because if people need to get out of a relationship, they're going to need some support. So you have to know what supports are available. Important to be aware of the dynamics, kind of those theories of abuse. Again, as kind of background information, may not influence real directly your intervention, but it provides you some context and may help you deal with your own emotional reactions to the situations if you can get some understanding of why these things are happening, because it seems so unjust and so unfair. And whenever victims aren't able to leave, there can be kind of anger at the victim. And being aware of the dynamics involved can help you deal with your own feelings that will keep you from harming this person even more by lashing out at them with your anger. Important to remember that it's a diverse population in terms of abusers and victims of partner violence. So you can't make assumptions about a couple based on any kind of demographic characteristics. Ambivalence is huge. And you have to meet people where they are. You don't judge them for being where they are. But you also have the stance that there is a place to be, and the place to be is in a relationship that doesn't involve physical or emotional abuse. And that's kind of your rock. You believe that this is how things should be, but I'm going to meet you where you are, and my hope for you is to get you to this other place, but I can't drag you there. Whenever you're ready to move in that direction, I'm glad to help you. Right? I'm glad to ask you questions to help you think about whether or not you want to move in that direction. As always with crisis, safety considerations come first and foremost, and you have to be cautious if you're on the phone with a person. You want to find out if the abuser is in the home at the time. If they come to the office, did the abuser bring you here? Are they waiting outside? Did they follow you? Asking those questions that don't come up with other crisis situations. And then the last thing is recognize that the intervention may not be the last time, and the last time in a couple ways. May not be the last time you see them, may not be the last time they're in crisis. Right? Because women that are in abusive relationships that leave, usually they leave multiple times before leaving for good. But just because your intervention may not be the last time doesn't mean that it can't be effective. If you can move them, toward that goal of healthy relationships, positive self-concept, good self-esteem, then you're doing good work. Right? And it's not always that the fact that, okay, this intervention has to cure the person of this problem. I have to make sure that they never are in a bad relationship again. That will be great, but may not be realistic. You want to move them toward healthy relationships, healthy feelings about themselves. And if you can do that, if you can get some movement, then you're doing the good work. And understanding that and believing that will help you keep doing that work whenever you see an individual come back through again after maybe you thought it was the last time you were going to see them. Okay, that's all for now. Take care.